All right, let me share my slides. Today, we're going to be talking about a really excellent book. I truly think this is my favorite of the 16 books that we have gone through in the Empowered Parent Book Club. The title is Good Inside, Guide to Becoming the Parent You Want to Be. And the author is Dr. Becky Kennedy. You've probably heard of her. She is very popular. She became an overnight sensation on Instagram during the pandemic and now has millions of followers, I think, on Instagram. This book has been a New York Times bestseller for months. She's been featured on all kinds of channels in interviews with Jonathan Haidt and other people and on talk shows. So if you haven't heard of Dr. Becky Kennedy, you've been missing out. She is a child and adult psychologist. And as a child and adult psychiatrist, I think what I loved the most about this book was the way she's able to help us understand why we should be doing the things she suggests, the way she suggests them for our kids in order to have them grow up into adults who don't deal with some of the issues that some of us deal with. So there were several points that she brought up, and I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like she's talking to me, or I feel like she's talking to my husband, because it was like she could see into our souls and know what we were going through or what we have gone through in our own childhoods. Without further ado, we'll dive right in. Let's see. Let me just make sure everything is set up correctly here. All right, I'm recording the Zoom. I wasn't able to get into Facebook Live. Sorry about that. And hopefully I'm sharing my slides. So here we go. So if you are not on my list yet, please go to theparentdoctor.com/book club and sign up. Like I said, this is the 16th book that I have read and summarized for parents. We've got 300 plus people on our book club list, but it's always growing. And I invite you to invite as many of your friends as you would like. I love doing this book club. It's really a lot of fun. I love the feedback that I get from people. For each book, I give this short video summary as well as an actionable worksheet for you to be able to implement some of the key takeaways that the authors have presented. Once you join the book club, and again, this is totally free, you'll get an automated series of emails that will give you access to all the past replays and worksheets. You log into portal.theparentdoctor.com to get access to those things. If you have any trouble, just email us at hello@theparentdoctor.com to let us know. And if you haven't yet taken a listen to my podcast, please go to Apple or Spotify and search for the Parent Doctor podcast. I'll put these slides up and you can listen to it with the link there. And this book club is a pretty much lecture, right? I'm talking about the book that I've read and summarizing it. It's not meant to be an open conversation, although sometimes if we have lots of people able to join, we will have a little bit of discussion. But the place where I meet and greet other parents and let them pick my brain about any topics related to your well-being as a parent or your relationship with your kids or your questions about your kids' behavior, how to get them to do this, how to get them to stop doing that, whatever it is, how to understand why they're doing something. The office hours is the place to do that. This is a really low fee, $29 a month membership where you get a live call with me each month on the second Friday at 10 a.m. And you can ask me anything. This is not medical advice. I'm not doing any diagnosing or treating, but this is a place where parents can come and ask me any questions. I usually have a topic that I'm speaking about. For example, this month being tax month, I talked about kids and money. But if there are live questions that people have, those take precedence over any agenda that I might otherwise have. I'm really here for you in the office hours, and I would love to have you there. So you join up for that at www.theparentdoctor.com/office-hours. All right, so the core philosophy of Good Inside, this book by Dr. Becky Kennedy, is that all of us, all of our children, all of us too, are good inside. I know that's a deep thought. It's so simple, but it's so true as well. So even during challenging behaviors that our kids might exhibit, they remain inherently good. And if we can hold on to that idea and always, or as much as possible, assume the most generous interpretation of whatever they're doing and saying, even when it's really hard behavior, like I hate you, or throwing things, or slamming doors, even when it's really big, messy emotions, if we can hold on to that inner certainty that our kids are good inside, they're just having a hard time in this moment, it will have a very positive, lasting impression on their development and on our relationship with them. She says throughout the book, two things can be true. You can hold firm boundaries as a parent while your child feels disappointed. And your child can act out and still be a good kid. Both of those things are true. So you can have a good kid who makes mistakes, who acts out, who has tough days and tough behaviors. And you can be a loving parent who holds firm boundaries, even when your child is upset about them. She says we need to connect before we correct. And I love this too. The focus is on maintaining connection with our children while we maintain a boundary rather than controlling their behavior and needing them to behave differently. Because the reality is we can't control their behavior. They can't control their behavior. That's why they're having a tough behavior. And so we need to just accept that they're having a tough time, to know that they are a good person underneath that, and then to build trust and a safe space for them by maintaining that safety and calmness. So I'm going to scatter in some quotes. There were several quotes in this book that I was just like, oh, this is so golden. So this one is feeling satisfied with oneself, tolerant of failure, firm in boundaries, capable of self-advocacy, and connected with others. All of these important adult dynamics come from our early wiring. The first years of life set the stage for the next 100. And again, as I was reading this book, there were so many examples of illustrations that she gave of the ways that things probably went awry, or the way needs weren't met, or the way emotions weren't empathically validated by a parent in childhood, led to a problem in adulthood that persisted. And as a psychiatrist who's worked with lots of adults and a psychiatrist who works with kids and families, I can promise you that this is all very true. And there were so many times that I was like, oh yeah, it's so true. Because if you miss, again, I don't want to put stress on you or make you feel bad. The beauty of this book is that she doesn't make us feel bad. She really praises anyone who reads this book for trying to be a cycle breaker, for having the desire to do things better and differently than maybe your parents were able to do. She doesn't place any blame, and she makes it very clear, which is true, that it's never too late to repair a relationship. So even if your kids are in their 30s and you're reading this book and thinking, oh my God, I totally screwed up, I wish I'd done better, it's not too late to talk to them and to say, hey, remember when this happened and I really wish I had been there for you and I wish I had handled it differently. You can do that and it will have just as much of a positive impact later as it would have had in the moment. So even though this is true, the first years of life do set the stage for the next 100 in terms of our emotional development. It's also true that it's never too late. So key important lessons that all kids must learn while they are under our care when they're minors. I have been saying this for years too, and I've noticed this in my work with teenagers who had drug dependency problems in a partial hospital program. There was often a problem the parents had with this first statement. My parent can love me, truly value me, and not permit me to do everything I want. So tolerating a child's distress and frustration without needing to save them or fix it is modeling that frustration comes from being a learner, and that frustration comes because you are a human being, and all human beings desire quick relief when we're facing a stressful situation. So anxious parents who tend to step in too much and try to prevent their kids from experiencing any distress really then become permissive parents who ultimately set their kids up to feel unable to tolerate any distress. And that's a big risk factor for substance use later in life. So by sending the message that you can tolerate your child's distress and tolerate it because you know that's part of the feeling of learning something new or getting better at something or waiting for the prize, right? The delayed gratification, that's also frustrating. But sitting back with a calm, non-anxious presence while your child is in that frustration state and saying, I love you, I'm here, I know it's hard, is what we need to do, not to jump in and say, okay, I'll fix it. The second is my parents can see me at my worst and still know I'm a good person. This is really her premise of good inside. We need to be able to convey to our kids that we know no matter how they're behaving, no matter what they're saying, no matter what they're throwing, that they are a good kid who's having a tough time in this moment. She uses the phrase most generous interpretation. When I work with parents, I use the phrase assume positive intent. Can you assume positive intent here? And it's challenging. I will tell you, in the moment when your kids are displaying some bad behaviors, it's really hard to assume positive intent. But the good news is, even though none of us will be 100% with this in the moment when we're triggered by our kids' bad behavior to be able to assume positive intent in that moment all the time. That's pretty much impossible. We can do it after the fact and still have just as positive an impact. So I liked this a lot too. She uses it throughout the book in different scenarios. We need to know what our job is as parents and what our kids' job is. And that helps us to feel less guilty and to feel less self-critical, because even when things are going haywire or not turning out the way you would like, you can ask yourself, okay, but did I do my job here? And if the answer is yes, you can feel good about it, even if your kid is still upset. So the job that we have is to, obviously, number one, ensure our kids' physical and emotional safety. And then number two is to connect with them and validate their emotional experience. So she talks about modeling healthy boundaries with empathy, showing what regulation looks like during difficult moments, by saying things to our kids in the heat of the moment, by saying, wow, you're really upset. I'm feeling upset seeing you upset. I'm going to take a deep breath. To actually model them for them, I'm going to take a deep breath, or I'm feeling really upset right now and I feel like my words might get angry. I love you and I want to handle this, but I'm going to step in the other room until I feel my body calm down, and then we'll rejoin this conversation. So modeling for our kids how we can feel our feelings in the moment, recognize them, recognize when they might be leading us to do or say something that wouldn't be the best, and doing what we need to do, whether that's taking a break, going for a walk, calling a friend, taking a deep breath, so that our kids can learn to regulate themselves by seeing us do it first. So this is why emotional regulation is the number one pillar of what I work with parents on. It's emotion regulation, defining direction, embracing failure, and practicing gratitude. Those are the 4 pillars that I've come up with. But essentially, as you'll see, what Dr. Becky is saying in here is exactly the same. And what many of the other parenting books we've covered in the last 15 months, they say the same things too. But what I love about the way she conveys things is the fact that she can really give examples that we can relate to. Like, I'll talk about some of them as we go along, but she just makes it so clear why the way she's saying we should do things with our kids is the right way. Because she puts you in a situation where you imagine that you're having a hard time with your boss or with your spouse. And then you imagine how they're talking to you. She does a great job with this on her social media posts as well. And then you feel it in your body. Like, how would you feel if your spouse reacted this way when you were expressing distress in this way? How would you feel if your boss responded this way if you were at work? And you recognize, oh yeah, like the power of empathic listening is really a huge power. And otherwise you feel dismissed and you feel more angry. And that really helps us understand why our kids tend to escalate when we do what we do so often, which is jump to conclusions, tell them they shouldn't feel that way, rationalize their behaviors, etc. All right, so we've heard about this as well from Dan Siegel. Again, neither of these people, Dr. Becky Kennedy or Dr. Dan Siegel, even though they're both amazing, neither of them invented this neuroscience. This is information we've known for a long time. So forgive this AI picture of a child's brain. It's not perfect, but deep inside the brain are the 2 amygdala. They are almond-shaped sections of the brain. They're very primitive. Our brains evolved in very thoughtful ways. The most important parts, like the parts that regulate your breathing and keep your heart beating, are deep inside so that they're the safest. Okay, it's like the yolk of an egg. So they're the most protected. Then the most evolutionary advanced parts, the parts that make us human, are these outer parts, like the red part, the prefrontal cortex. What's happening as kids grow and develop is that prefrontal cortex is growing bigger and bigger. The time when it grows the most is during pre-adolescence and adolescence, but especially early adolescence. My son right now is 12. He is smack dab in the midst of this total reconstruction of his brain, and it's painful at times for him and for me. But basically, the downstairs brain, which is the fear center, its job is to keep you alive. And it's sensing things from all of the senses, what you hear, what you think, what you feel, and deciding, am I safe? Am I not safe? So as a child grows up, you can imagine this also becomes a better sensor, right? You know this. You know that a 15-year-old is better at understanding what might be dangerous in the world around them than a 2-year-old. But the problem with a 15-year-old is the connections, which she calls the staircases, that go between your prefrontal cortex, which is your rational brain, your thoughtful brain, and your amygdala or your fearful brain, are under construction. So that's why a 15-year-old sometimes does the most stupid thing. And after the fact, He or she has no idea why they did it. They can't really answer it. They would have known on a multiple choice test that was really dumb. But in the moment, it seemed like a really good idea. So when we think about this, we can understand that every time our kids act out in a way that we don't like, it's because their upstairs brain, the staircase that connects to the downstairs brain to help it regulate, is not yet strong enough. And our job is to help them connect those two pieces. When she says, see the good inside your child, what she's saying is that the prefrontal cortex part, the really best part of your kid, is always there. It's just sometimes it's not in the driver's seat controlling what your kid is saying and doing. And what we need to do as parents who love our kids and help them see themselves as valuable all the time and not as shame-filled young people is to know that what's going on right now is just that you're having a really hard time. And so what we need to do is help you build that staircase, be able to regulate. So the power of empathy comes from basically being able to take a difficult emotion that your child is experiencing, take an overactivation in that downstairs brain, bring your prefrontal cortex into the equation, and help that become easier for them to bear. So if your child is having a blow up, a meltdown about something, and you respond in anger, you're going to make their amygdala fire more, not less. But if you can respond with empathy, saying, man, that really stinks. I can imagine that must have been so frustrating. I'm so sorry. Even if it seems so ridiculous, then it helps their amygdala to calm down. And she gives a great example here. This is where I'm saying she does such a good job with this. She gives the example of, let's say I wanted to go out to dinner with my friends and I just got out of my work clothes and I want to put on my coziest sweater and I can't find it anywhere. And I finally find it in the dryer, and it's a sweater that shouldn't have gone in the dryer. And I pull it out and it's the size of my toddler. And I'm like, no. And I'm having this meltdown like a toddler. And my husband comes around the corner and is like, oh, come on, give me a break. It's just a sweater. So if he says that, how am I going to feel? Versus if he's, oh man, your favorite sweater. Oh, that sucks. And so that's a perfect example of helping us understand why our kids need empathy, because the situation is the same, right? The sweater has shrunken. It sucks. But when your partner comes and says, that sucks, I'm so sorry, and they're not judging you for your outburst, they're seeing through the window of your behavior to what's really underneath, which is your disappointment, and validating that, it helps you to calm down. And this is even more true for our kids because their staircases are not really built yet. So for us as adults, when someone comes down the staircase and helps us remember there is an upstairs brain, we can recover pretty quickly. And kids really need us to do that for them. So I love what she said here. She said this connection divides their emotional burden in half, making difficult feelings easier to bear. And I think that's absolutely true. So no matter how ridiculous you think your child's reaction is to something, we need to understand their feeling, their emotion is still valid. It's still theirs. And we don't need to fix it. We don't need to agree with it. All we need to do is be with them with it and let them know we can understand why that's hard for them. Then once they're calmer, we can work on their self-recovery, their self-regulation. But in that moment, all they need is for us to have empathy and be with them in the crappiness of the moment. That will give them the space to be able to learn regulation. Okay, then she has a lot on resilience. And there was a chapter in here that I was blown away by because in our family, both myself and my husband, we both had situations in our early lives that lead us to sometimes struggle in different ways with needing to people please, needing to avoid shame. Nobody likes to feel ashamed. Brene Brown, we're going to have to read some of her books soon in the parent club or the book club. She writes and researches a lot about shame. But I thought that what Dr. Becky Kennedy wrote about in her book With Shame was just brilliant. So she says, if we don't do this, if we don't meet our kids' emotional distress with empathy, what happens is that child, because they get emotionally dismissed, if instead we say, oh, give me a break, it's just a sweater in that example, or I don't know, let's think of an example with my kids. So recently my son had a soccer game and they lost 1-0. He's the goalie. He felt a lot of upset over the fact that they lost. And he was upset with his own performance and his peers' performance and the whole situation. And if I had responded with whatever, it's a 6th grade soccer game, who cares? It doesn't matter. That would have been an emotional dismissal. That would not have helped him feel better. And that would have led him eventually to have difficulty processing shame in adulthood. Now, he's not yet an adult. I'm not saying I haven't screwed up my kid and he's never going to need therapy. but I'm doing my best here. Basically, we want them to understand, I get it. That really stinks. I'm not trying to fix it. I can't fix it. Like the sweater has shrunk, the game is lost, whatever it is, but we can just be there with them. And then children will learn, if you don't connect with them and exhibit empathy, that so they're constantly trying to feel safe in their environment. Kids need to have attachment to a parent. They need you to survive. So if you've said something harsh to them, their rationalization is going to be, they must be right. Therefore, I can't trust my feelings. Therefore, I am bad inside. This is huge. This was a really big eye-opening connection that I had reading this book, because if they don't have trust over their own emotional response, they actually learn that I am bad and the world outside is good because it's adaptive for them when they're children. And this leads adults to be prone to shame and a lot of self-soothing behaviors like addiction that can come along with feeling ashamed. So true resilience grows from us giving our kids empathy. Children need to know that their emotions are valid, even if the behavior associated with that emotion needs some shaping. The emotion doesn't need to be invalidated. The behavior can be shaped, corrected, but the emotion we need to tolerate. Teens and adults, we define ourselves by others' treatment and not our internal compass if we haven't gotten enough empathy from our parents and other primary caregivers in our youth. So the empathic solution, validating emotions, it builds a self-trust, self-confidence in our emotions, and that leads us to have authentic resilience. This is another great quote. If children couldn't rely on an adult to come to help them, to be there, to repair and reconnect in difficult moments, then the world would feel pretty unsafe. It's more comforting for a child to internalize badness. I'm bad inside, because at least then he can hold on to the idea that the world around him is safe and good. This is that whole attachment need. We need our parents, we need a caregiver to survive in childhood. So we would rather believe that our parent is good and we are bad than to believe that a parent is bad and we are good, because the latter is more threatening to our survival. It's paradoxical. And as a psychiatrist, I can tell you this is absolutely true. Like kids who are raised in difficult families where there's a lot of abuse or whatever, this can lead to a lot of confusion in the adult about whether or not to trust their emotions. And that pans out as problematic relationships throughout the lifespan until you can get a hold on it through therapy. All right. So building true resilience is all about inner strength. And confidence is the capacity to handle discomfort. It's not believing that you're great. It is the capacity to handle difficulty. And we just support that by being a supportive presence, staying there with our kids when they are struggling without rescuing them, letting them know this feels hard because it is hard. This is hard and I can do it. Recognizing the feelings of the difficulty without being overwhelmed by it. So if we get overwhelmed by our kids' overwhelm in a situation where they're struggling, then we want to step in and rescue. And that ultimately sends the message that we don't think they can do it either, which is the opposite of what they need from us. They also don't need us to throw them into the deep end of the pool and be like, get over yourself. And in listening to this book, reading this book, I realized there have been times that even as a child psychiatrist, I've struggled with this because my oldest was very shy and slow to warm up when he was young. And there was one time I remember he was 3 and we had him in soccer. Why? I don't know. But he didn't want to get on the field. And this is something that pans out a lot in families that I see too. You have an anxious kid, anxious temperament. One parent, in this case it was me, wants to just throw them in the deep end and be like, just get him out there. He's got to get over it. And the other parent, my husband, was coddling him. But in both cases, we were both overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed in the sense of I can't handle this. You got to get out there. You got to play soccer. My husband was overwhelmed in the sense of I can't tolerate your distress. I need to fix it. What our kids need is to be somewhere in the middle, right? To say, yeah. And she says, this feels tricky. I like that a lot, to say to your kid, yeah, it feels tricky, but you'll know when you're ready to join the party. You'll know when you're ready to go on the soccer field. And I love that so much. And I wish that I could rewind and do that soccer game again, because It really respects the fact that we know, we have certainty that our kid will do that thing eventually. Of course, it's a given. There's no doubt. We know that he's a good kid or she's a good kid who's going to be able to go and play with friends once they get older. But right now, today, for whatever reason, it's tricky. And she gives the example again of being at a party and saying to your spouse, I don't really feel like socializing. Can you just stand near me? And your spouse could respond one of two ways. They could say, oh, it sounds like you're having weird feelings or feeling a little anxious. No problem. Just stay near me. And when you're ready, you can go mingle. Or your spouse can be invalidating and say, what are you talking about? All these people, you're being so clingy. Just get over it. You feel that in your body, right? The difference. And so we can, with those examples of what it would be like from an adult to an adult, understand better, I think, how it is when we talk to our kids. I love this idea as well. She talks about behavior as a window. So behavior not as the thing that we need to change. It's often the thing that we focus on. It's often the thing that parents who bring their children to me, a child psychiatrist, are focused on. My kid won't go to school. My kid isn't doing their homework. My kid plays too much video games. My kid won't go to sleep on time. It's the behavior that parents are focused on, and it's leading them to tell a story about their child. She's lazy, he's rude, whatever it is. She's inviting us to see behavior as a window. Every challenging behavior reveals an underlying need or emotion. So if we can respond to a behavior with curiosity instead of with judgment, then we can make a connection with our child rather than a disconnect. If we ask better questions by assuming the most generous interpretation of the behavior, we have a better chance of being able to connect with our kids. And we have to connect before we can correct. And she gives examples in the book of this, like with a boss and an employee, which also help you understand this is absolutely true. If you try to correct someone before they feel understood by you, it will not work. And so if we really want to have maximal impact in shaping our kids' understanding of themselves and behavior in the future, we have to first empathize and validate the emotional experience they're having. She gives practical daily strategies. There's many of them throughout this book. In fact, the last few chapters really give examples of families like, this is happening with this mom and child or this dad and child. And she goes through the whole lesson and then she says, this is how it plays out. So it's really a well-structured book, but these tips are really great. One is slow down. Often we are rushing to fix problems. And if we connect and just have presence before we try to solve it, we're going to see better results with our kids. The second is reframe mistakes. So we'll get to this in a minute, but perfectionism can be a common problem in kids. And often unwittingly, I think it's driven by our behavior as parents. And so if instead of being focused on the outcome and the goal, which tends to drive perfectionism, we can reframe mistakes, failures, struggles as learning points, the frustration and the feeling that comes between knowing and not knowing is a sign that you're learning something, and that's actually a good thing. Using playfulness. So she has a whole chapter about whining and how whining is really just about really wanting something and not getting it. She gives an example of how one morning in New York City, where she lives, she went to a cafe to get some coffee and they weren't open. And the guy popped his head out and said, sorry, our machines are down. We'll be ready in about 20 minutes. And she was like, please, it's like whining like a little child. So even adults, we can whine sometimes. And she gave examples of how that person could have responded. She wasn't proud of her behavior, but she was just recognizing that this is where it comes from, right? It's behavior is a window. And so if we can use playfulness and not meet that with, give me a break, or I don't like that tone. She says, what? How did the wines get in here? Let's get them out of here. I must have left the window open, and then go and playfully toss the wines out the door, imaginary wines. That can make a kid giggle and get them over their whining. Rather than saying, I don't like that tone of voice, or not in that tone of voice, or I don't like it when you do that. Stop whining. If we just treat it more playfully, we're more likely to see what we want. And then neutralizing power struggles. So there's a whole chapter in here about picky eaters, and the same premise comes through, which is we can't control our kids. And she bases this on the research of a psychologist who's also a dietitian who does a lot of work with eating disorders. But she emphasizes that our job as parents when it comes to eating is giving our kids healthy foods. So we determine the what, the when, the where. We have to set that boundary. And then our kids are in control of their bodies and they decide what goes in their body. So we can't force them to eat. We don't want to. We want to neutralize the power struggle by just saying, I've done my job. Now you can choose to do your job or not, but I'm not going to get upset about it if you don't eat certain things. That's up to you. Boundaries with connection. So within the parent-child dance, our roles are complementary. Kids are going to express their emotions honestly. That is their job. And our job is to provide safety and structure. So this whole series happens over and over every day. Your kid expresses raw emotions that will emerge as a behavior sometimes or a rude statement. We are going to see through the window of that behavior and have a most generous interpretation, seeing the good inside child below it, validate the feelings as valid. Then once we've connected, we're going to correct and set the boundary. We'll do it faster if we need to, if there's any kind of safety issue. And then we maintain connection because the relationship remains intact through the process. So this balance creates an environment where your child's learning my feelings matter and behavior has boundaries. She's very clear that she's not about permissive parenting. This isn't gentle parenting. This is attuned parenting. This is empowered parenting. So this part really gave me a lot of hope. I'm sure it will give all of the readers a lot of hope too. Again, the emphasis here is that there's no time limit on repair. It is never too late in any relationship to fix a mistake in your communication and connection with another person. And with our kids, we want to acknowledge what happened. So she gives an example of, you spilled your milk earlier and I yelled. I want to talk about it. You can say what you wish you'd done. I wish I had controlled my body better and taken a deep breath so that I could have helped you clean it up calmly. And then you can commit to try again. This is all any of us can ever do, right? Which is, next time I'm going to try to remember that accidents happen and stay calm. And you can remind me of that too. So again, this gives our kids permission to make mistakes, and it's going to make it easier for them to own their mistakes in the future and seek our forgiveness, because we will have modeled to them that even as adults, we can make mistakes and seek forgiveness. So we're not expecting perfection. So again, the goal is not perfection. She makes it very clear. There's no expectation that any of us is ever going to 100% be able to be the calm, non-anxious presence that our kids need in every moment of life. That's really unrealistic. So we have to accept reality that there are going to be misaligned moments, that even if we have the best of intentions, even if we've read all the books, even if we are a double board certified child psychologist or psychiatrist, we still have moments where we lose our shit and we scream at our kids. Perfect parenting doesn't exist. So we want to practice vulnerability by returning to those difficult interactions after the fact. Don't sweep it under the rug and pretend nothing happened. Own it. Apologize for it. Explain to your child what you wished had happened and how you hope to do it differently. And as they get older, ask for their input. Ask them to help you keep track of things. Ask them to call you out when things start getting escalated. Hey, let's take a break. We're getting upset. Let's both do that so that we don't yell at each other again. Model accountability by showing them that addressing discomfort strengthens relationships. So again, admitting a mistake doesn't make the relationship worse. It makes it stronger, right? And building repair skills. It helps us to get better at rupture and repair, at apology and genuine reconnection. She has a whole chapter on perfectionism, which is great. If you have a child who struggles with perfectionism, I would highly recommend you read that one. And she's had a lot of posts on her social media about this too. And I think she describes this so well. So she says, between knowing something and not knowing something, or knowing how to do something and not knowing how to do something, there's a space and a time. And the emotion of that space is frustration every time. And think about that. It's absolutely true. Between being able to do something and struggling with it, there's a time, which might be years long, where your primary emotional experience is frustration. And the truth is that the most successful people in life are the ones who can have grit and persist through that frustration, who get a dopamine rush from chewing on a bone, who want to work hard at things that are hard. Persistence is the key to success. And often, I think today, especially in this age of social media and video games and all these things that give us tons of dopamine, our kids are wired for the opposite, for the quick fix. And all human beings are wired for the quick fix. But we have to train ourselves to seek and yearn for the difficult solution that is the big prize at the end. So we want to teach our kids to embrace discomfort by teaching them that frustration is not a sign they're doing something wrong or that they stink at something and they should give up. It's a sign that they are learning. It's not a sign of failure. This is why embracing failure is one of the 4 pillars that I teach. We want to model vulnerability. And she gives a great example of maybe I try a new recipe and it comes out poorly. And I can say to my kids, like, oh man, I thought that this would come out better, but it was my first time and it really didn't work. But I guess I learned that next time I really have to cook the onions before I bake this thing or whatever it is. And then you want to celebrate the attempts. So you want to give yourself, she gave this little example of her daughter teaching her a word in Spanish. And she said, 1-0. And she told her daughter, I just learned something because I didn't know that before. So 1-0, like I know something that I didn't know before. What are you learning? So you want to celebrate the venture into that unknown rather than the outcome. And then we want to normalize failure. I really like this idea that I've come up with, which is asking myself when I'm having a hard time with my kids, what would Mr. Rogers do? So a lot of the books, the last 3 we've read actually, all talk about the importance of, as much as possible, maintaining a calm, non-anxious presence with our kids when they are struggling. And I think no one did this better than Mr. Rogers. And if you're of my generation, you probably watched a lot of Mr. Rogers. So we want to embody that calm, non-anxious presence. The next time you find yourself struggling or losing your cool with your kids, ask yourself, what would Mr. Rogers do? What would he say? When we're thinking about trying to break ourselves and our kids free from perfectionism, we want to keep in mind that being focused on the outcome robs us of the joy that can come from that frustration in the learning stage. It convinces us that the process will only be valuable if we have a certain outcome. So we want to separate being and who we are from the doing and the outcome. Help kids understand that whether they make a mistake or they succeed, it doesn't define them. This is why I have challenged my son, who's in 6th grade, to bring home a C on his report card. I told him I would give him $100. He has yet to do it, but I hope that he will. This is a very safe time, 6th grade, for him to get a C on his report card. He's a straight A student. He's a very driven, perfectionistic kid. And I really hope he will. Maybe I have to up it. Maybe it has to be $150 or something. But I want him to know that his grades don't determine his value. And he can bring home a straight A report card. I'm like, okay, great job. You're doing a lot of hard work. Are you happy with it? Are you happy with your work-life balance? Are you having enough fun? Because he's only going to get to be a kid once, and I don't want to put that pressure on him. I want him to value the journey, celebrate the effort, have curiosity, and enjoy the process, regardless of whether the outcome is what he hoped for, because the process is really what it's all about. That's life, right? It's the journey. And this we've heard before. We read last year Mindset by Carol Dweck. Dr. Becky talks about that in this chapter about perfectionism, how when we can do this, we really foster a growth mindset in our kids, and that helps them to also have grit. And we want to normalize the fact that as we learn, it's not always linear. You don't always just get better and better at something. Inevitably, there's going to be, you get better, you get worse, you get better, you get worse, you get better, you take some time off, you get worse, you get better. It's not a linear process. All right, more practical challenges. We want to revisit some of these chapters if any of these are issues for you. One was deeply feeling kids. This is what Dr. Becky became known for. I think her eldest son is one of these kids that we call orchid kids in psychology literature, these kids who are bigger in their emotional responses, neurotypical, so they don't have autism, but they just have bigger emotions than most other kids, and they take longer to recover from those emotions. And the parents of these kids can feel alone because they think, is it all in my head? Like maybe they even bring their kid to get evaluated and they're told, no, your kid's fine, they're normal, they're typical, there's nothing wrong. But it can feel like you're doing something wrong when you have a child who's a deeply feeling kid. And these are pretty common. And so this is a whole chapter on how to manage deeply feeling kids. There's a whole chapter on sleep, a whole chapter on picky eaters and mealtime battles, and a whole chapter on whining and tears. So I didn't go through all of those here, but go through those if you want. And that's the end of today's book club. I hope this was helpful for you guys. And I'll see you next month. Let me check what we're reading next month, actually. Hold on, I forget. Let's see. Oh, next month is Johann Hari, Stolen Focus, Why You Can't Pay Attention and How to Think Deeply Again. Johann Hari wrote a book called, it was about depression. He is I think a New York Times columnist. He's a British writer and journalist, and his book was called Lost Connections. It came out in 2018. It was a great book about depression and the rising incidence of depression, the rising prescriptions of antidepressants, how we might be going about the way we think about treating depression wrong. And I can't wait to read his book, Stolen Focus. I haven't read it yet. But I think given that we're in a similar situation now, especially after the pandemic, there's been a rise in both adults and teenagers and kids who are thinking that they have ADHD. I think a lot of this stems from the fact that we're now in a culture that is, our attention is being drawn and sought by a lot of huge companies that are spending billions of dollars on understanding our psychology and what keeps our eyes glued to screens. And the average attention span when we're scrolling is very short now, right? Our behaviors have really changed in terms of how often we read books, how often we read newspapers. We're consuming things in much shorter snippets, which ultimately is making our attention muscles weaker. And so I can't wait to read this book. I think it'll be a really good one. It's not particularly a parenting book, but I'm sure it will be of interest to many of us. So I'll see you guys on the third Wednesday of May at noon. And that is, let me look at my calendar. Nope, the 21st of May is when we'll be talking next. All right, take care. Bye.